In that agrarian economy, you're just labor. Land is capital. And so to gain money and wealth and to have freedom, you have to have land.
Haven't made $1 bed. Luck is all I've had.
At the end of the war, President Abraham Lincoln had promised the freedmen 40 acres of land per family. But those promises died with Lincoln's assassination.
Instead of 40 acres and a mule, they got the Freedmen's Bank. So instead of land, they were given a bank.
Union soldiers were getting bonuses. So the idea was to create a way to encourage the men to save the money so they wouldn't go squander it or be defrauded out of the money.
It was sold to the freedmen as better than giving you the land. You will earn the money through wages, and you will save it, and you'll buy your own land, and you'll feel better about that. Never mind that hundreds of years of working the land didn't count for earning the land.
The Freedmen's Bank was privately held, owned, and managed by wealthy white men. But the bank's aggressive marketing conveyed a different impression to its black depositors.
The passbooks, the notes, all featured, the heroes. It was Abraham Lincoln, it was General Grant, Howard. It was very targeted. So people were saying, these are the men who freed us. And they're saying, come to this bank.
In freedom, some skilled African Americans saved their hard-earned capital at the Freedmen's Bank and went into business for themselves. For some black business people, personal services were the clearest path to success, and sometimes wealth.
They recognized that their ability to have a particular kind of skill set, which was something that the white population needed, allowed them a certain kind of mobility and freedom.
Many of them were able to cash in on expectations that they were replicating their servant roles where whites were in power and African Americans were serving them. For example, a number of black barbers continued to keep their exclusively white clientele after the war.
All these barbers spent that time in the barbershop, nurturing these relationships with white men, and used that money from the barbershop to help fund and to help fuel a black economic movement within their own communities.
From barbershops to grocery stores, black businesses relied on the Freedmen's Bank. But a decade after it was founded, Bank President Henry Cook was running the Freedmen's Bank into the ground.
Here was Cook saying, look at all this money. They're putting their money in my bank, and whenever I need it, I'm gonna reach in and get it.
Henry Cook starts looting the bank. He just starts taking this money and lending it or giving it to some friends and acquaintances, just putting the capital into railroad bonds, which was the subprime market of the day.
With the Freedmen's Bank on the verge of collapse, the federal government turned to the best-known African-American leader in the country to salvage it.
Congress brought in Frederick Douglass to serve as the new president of the Freedmen's Bank. Initially, he invested $10,000 of his own money as a way to shore up the bank, as well as to encourage other African Americans to continue to deposit their money into the bank. But the bank was beyond saving. So Douglass had to go to Congress and say that the bank was bankrupt and it needed to close.
The fact is, I was married to a corpse. I found that I had been placed there with the hope that by some drugs or some mighty magic, I would bring it back. But the life, which was the money, was gone.
The hard-earned savings of the freedmen were lost just in the markets, just poof. And nobody gets prosecuted. This was white-collar crime, actual just crime. It was theft, and nobody goes to prison for it.
Not even 10 additional years of slavery could have done so much to throttle the thrift of the freedmen as the mismanagement and bankruptcy of the series of savings banks chartered by the nation for their special aid.
From 1865 to 1874, about 70,000 people deposited the equivalent of $1.3 billion in modern day numbers. So African Americans enthusiastically embraced the Freedmen's Bank. It was a deep loss for African Americans and a loss of a vast amount of Black wealth.
Soon after the collapse of the bank, the federal government withdrew from the South, returning control of the region to former slave owners. The dream of full citizenship for African Americans came to a screeching halt.
We see the end of efforts to educate formerly enslaved people. We see the end of the protection of the right to vote. And what is allowed to happen is a series of legislative and extra-legal attempts to suppress African-American freedom.
Any land that was able to be secured is also violently retaken. And so what you see is a reassertion of that racial hierarchy in the South that had the white landowners at the top and Black labor at the bottom.